Am I too fat for the Triumph 400? That's a question I had to ask myself. And I've gotten some comments, and I appreciate all the comments, one way or the other, about the fact that in the near future I may want to move up to a bigger bike. And so I thought I would make this video addressing the concern of how much power a bike like this has for someone that's bigger like me. So for context, I'm about 6 foot tall and weigh just over 240 pounds. I just weighed myself before the video. And this is the Triumph Speed 400. You know, no argument, this is a starter bike. It's not a lot of power. But I'd like to point out, this is not your dad's 400, right? The compression and the specs on this bike are really comparable to a much larger bike from the old carbureted days. So with that in mind, I think it's a fair question of, is this bike a good starter bike for a larger person? Or are they better off just starting with like a 660 or an 800 or something bigger to begin with? And that was recommended to me by the dealer I went to, or at least pointed out as an option for me. And I'm really glad I went with the 400. And I do see myself moving up to a bigger bike one day. But so far, I've not reached the limit of this bike. I've got almost 1,000 miles on it. I'll do another review when I get to 1,000 miles. But as far as power and torque have gone, there has been no issue. The other day, I ran down Highway 1 almost to Santa Cruz, and spent about a half hour doing 70-ish miles an hour without any real issue. Up in sixth gear, just cruising. I think the bike could have gone a little faster, but that was my comfort level. I didn't want to go any faster. So if you're wanting to do long interstate cruising, obviously this is not the bike for you. But if you're wanting to get on two wheels and start out and have something that you can control, I think this is actually a pretty good starting option for someone that's a little bit bigger. I think, the 125s and the 200s are probably a little small for a bigger person. But I think the 400 is, at least in my case, was just the right amount of power to start out. I think I'm going to keep it for a couple more years. I did a 3-year loan on it, and the reality is probably around the time I pay it off is around the time that I think I will be ready to move up to a bigger bike. Probably another Triumph, probably a Bonneville, maybe a Scrambler, maybe a Tiger. We'll see when the time comes. But this is definitely not underpowered for me at the moment with my riding style. And I think for pretty much any average riding style, I don't think this would be underpowered for someone in the same ballpark. So if you're afraid that this may not be enough power for you, I think that's probably not something you need to be so concerned about. Especially, I would encourage you to look up the torque specs and the horsepower specs and compare them to like a old carbureted 750 or 800 or something like that. And I think you'll see that the power difference is actually not all that different. I did that. I looked up the specs on this bike compared to my dad's old Virago 750 that he used to ride when I was a kid. And yeah, the 750 had a bit more torque, but really not all that much more torque. And like I said, unless you're going to cruise all day on the interstate, which you're not going to do as a beginner rider, I would encourage anyone to consider this as a starter bike. Now, that being said, I haven't gone out and ridden a 660 or an 800, so I don't have that comparison point. I've been thinking I'm at a point where maybe I do want to rent one and see what it's like to compare with. So if you have some experience, riding a bigger bike, maybe in that case you would be disappointed if you were to come down to the 400. But for someone that doesn't have that comparison and is a true beginner, I can tell you I'm not lacking power. I come out of the driveway and I get on the gas, and I don't get the front wheel off the ground. I'm not trying to, but I do. I can feel the bike lift and I can feel it pull, and it's even with my weight, it's certainly torquey enough for my comfort level. So I just wanted to share that. I do appreciate all the comments, one way or the other. If you think it's a great starter, if you think I would have been better off starting on something bigger, that's all constructive comments are welcome. And if you watched it this far, I'm going to ask you to do two things to help me out and help the channel grow. If you haven't yet, I'd love if you could subscribe, see what's coming next. I'm hoping I can post a little more frequently. Some things in my personal life are starting to settle down that will hopefully enable me to do that. And also, drop a comment on what bike you started out with, and let me know if you think it was a good choice or wasn't the best choice, and why. So thanks very much for watching to the end, and subscribe so you see what's coming.